Some preventative medication for the migraines, caused it to start falling out again. And then it just got thin and like it looked like I had a receding hairline. There was no hair hardly left in the front. So I just said, okay, I'm just going to buzz it and start all over.
Sure.
So,
You may think in it
yeah,
when you do that.
yeah, maybe I'll have chemo hair again. I don't know.
What's chemo hair?
Well, it all fell out, and then when it grew back, it was snow white and curly, curly, curly.
I've heard that when the hair grows back.
Yeah, everybody, not everyone loses their hair. Yeah.
Straight.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
And very, very
They don't
thick.
know they're being recorded. Just so you know, you're being recorded.
Oh.
We're doing it a different way today, hopefully, so the live stream will stay solid and consistent. And so I'm not pushing the button. Clint's pushing the button from his office.
And so you couldn't have told us that before.
Yeah, no. I didn't want to interrupt. Maybe he can edit it out.
That's okay. Now they'll.
Oh my goodness, I'm so embarrassed.
No, it's okay.
Don't worry.
You do have your phone on. Okay, good. Thank you so much for doing that.
Mhm.
Okay, good morning.
Good morning.
Good to see everybody. I know we have a couple of people definitely gone doing other things. Not sure about some. I don't know where Yvette is.
I don't know. I haven't heard from
Oh, she might be
Yvette.
here today.
I know Penny said she wouldn't be here.
Of course, Haley's out of town too. I
Oh.
talked to her yesterday. But anyway, okay. So we're going to finish up this little chart. If you have it, great. If not, I have extra. Does anybody need one? Everybody good? Got one? Okay. That's just what we're going to do today. Going to do something a little bit new. I don't know. We're just going to keep going through here. To catch us up, kind of just to review very quickly, let's remember that this is a time period in the 2nd century BC where we're primarily, I say 3rd and 2nd centuries BC, where we're learning about the Seleucids and the Ptolemies. That's what the top of this handout says. These were two parties who were really fighting a lot over the area of Palestine where God's people lived. And we do have to remember, this was after the Babylonian exile. This was after their captivity, after a remnant came back, and after many did not go back, right? So the Jews in Palestine were less in number than they ever were I guess I shouldn't say it than they ever were. Abraham was there with just Abraham and Sarah. Then Abraham, so there was like 3, Abraham, Sarah, and Isaac. Anyway, but they were low, comparatively speaking, before their exile. Low in number. Because not everybody desired to go back. A lot of them stayed in Babylon or went to other places or were in Egypt or whatever. But there were still God's people in Palestine. And during this history that we're studying, this intertestamental period, we're talking primarily right now about the Seleucids and the Ptolemies, named after the first rulers of each of these parties, Seleucus I and Ptolemy I. And while we're going through this, we're actually going through the book of Daniel, chapter 11. And we're going through kind of verse by verse, pretty much, in order to help us understand this history that the angel is telling Daniel. Daniel doesn't know what in the world he's talking about, of course, but he's recording it, or he records it. And all he knows it's going to happen in the future, way past Daniel's lifetime. It's going to happen at some point, but anyway, so we have it now, and now we're on this side of things in history, and so we can go back and go, oh, okay, this fits here, this fits here, this fits here. So that's just what we're doing. We got as far as, I think, Daniel 11, verse 17. We are up to the point where now the Seleucids are in control. You remember, between the Seleucids and the Ptolemies, control of Palestine's changed, flip-flop, 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 a lot. And the Jews were as fickle. They either really liked when the Ptolemies were ruling, or they didn't, or they really liked when the Seleucids came in, and then they didn't, so they were all over the map too. But at this point, after what we just finished last week in Daniel chapter 7, Daniel 11, verse 17, the Seleucids now have control of Palestine. We mentioned that this occurred after the Battle of Panion in 200. I think I had that. I don't know if y'all remember that, but anyway, it doesn't matter. And pretty much God's people are okay with this for now. Verse 17 talks about how Seleucus the second Antiochus the third. Sorry, that's not the wrong level. Antiochus the third gave his daughter Cleopatra the first, because there were 7 of them, gave his daughter Cleopatra to Ptolemy the fifth Epiphanes. You see him there? There's a little plus line between them. Okay. Antiochus III gave Cleopatra to Ptolemy V. Of course, in order to have an heir on the Ptolemy side, in order to gain that territory, primarily Egypt. Okay, so he thought he was doing something good. But his daughter didn't go along with the plan, remember? She, instead of holding up her father's side, the Seleucid side, she took the side of the Ptolemies and her husband. And so it didn't work out for Antiochus III as far as having an heir over there on the Ptolemy side. But he was still pretty much in control of Palestine at this time. Let's see. Yeah. That plan backfired. Let me get to the right page of my notes. So let's move forward. We're going to look at Daniel 11, verses 18 and 19. What does Antiochus III do next? So verse 18 says, after this, that's Antiochus III, he shall turn his face to the coastlands and shall take many, but a ruler shall bring the reproach against them to an end, and with the reproach removed he shall turn back on him. Then he shall turn his face toward the fortress of his own land, but he shall stumble and fall and not be found. Okay, so we have Antiochus III turning his face, so he's now turning his attention. He's got Palestine, so now he's going to expand his kingdom, or at least he's going to try to expand his kingdom, and he's turning his face toward what my version says, the coastlands. Your version say that too? That would be toward Asia Minor and Greece. So now he's looking toward the west. He wants west of Syria, and west of that as far as Greece. So if you have your map, I don't know if you have your map and wanted to look. I don't have my map with me on me. But, the map of the world. Map.
Oh.
Not timeline, map.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Let's see here.
Oh, I must have been out past that.
What's that?
I must have been out from this past that.
Oh, that's okay. It doesn't matter. You probably have one in the back of your Bible. Most Bibles do.
Yeah.
Anyway, but any map will do. Mine's a little different color, might be than yours. But anyway, you'll see where, if you can find Jerusalem on your map, that's where Palestine is, of course. That's what we're talking about. That's the area that was fought over.
There's Jerusalem.
Yeah.
Right.
And if you go south of Jerusalem, there's Egypt.
Yep.
Yep. Okay. Now, if you go north of Jerusalem, that's going to be Syria.
Right.
But now go west, and that's Asia Minor,
Okay.
where it might say Cilicia, Lycia, Lydia, Sardis. It might say things like that. And then if you keep going west, there's Greece. So that's what Antiochus III was looking for now. He wanted Asia Minor and Greece. Okay? Does that make sense? Are we okay? Good. All right. So that's what verse 18 means when it says now he set his face toward the coastlands. He's looking that direction. He wants those territories. But somebody interferes. It says, but a ruler shall bring the reproach against them to an end, and with the reproach he shall turn back on them. Okay, so in other words, all this is saying is that Antiochus III isn't going to have any success there. He's going to try, but he's going to fail because somebody's going to come in here, a ruler, And most people believe this was a Roman general named Scipio, Scipio. But he was the ruler who diverted and prevented Antiochus III from gaining these territories. This was Rome. Okay, so that's, of course, the next empire that we're going to study after we get through with Greece. They're coming up. They're making their name known. We've heard of them a couple times already, but here's another instance in history where Rome is interfering with Greeks, the Greeks' progress here in gaining territories. Let's see here. Make sure I got that's unnecessary. Let's see. Oh, this is something that is not here in the text, but is important to know, I think, historically. So Scipio apparently, in order to make sure that Antiochus III was going to keep his word and not come back and try to, do it again, sneak in under his radar and do it again, they make an agreement of some sort. And so Scipio basically takes 20 hostages from Antiochus III. So in order as a, what do you call it? What is that called? I don't know the word. He takes 20 hostages in order to secure the agreement to make sure that Antiochus III would keep his word. I know there's one big word that fits all of that.
Blackmail.
Ransom? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if blackmail fits.
Blackmail.
But anyway, doesn't matter.
Something like that.
20 hostages is what the Roman general wanted.
Right.
And so among those 20, this is the important part.
Right.
Is Antiochus III's son, Antiochus IV. He gives him into the hands of the Romans as a hostage. Okay, now, the reason that's important is because eventually Antiochus IV is going to rule, take his father's place. But what we don't realize is for 12 years, he was a hostage in Rome, under Roman authority. And while he was over there, this guy learned all about the Roman way of war. Romans, how they battle, Roman power, how they work, how they're organized, how they, whatever. And so while he was there, he kind of honed his own, he used that to his advantage and tried, honed his political astuteness about things, the political climate. So he learned a lot, in other words, while he was a Roman captive or a hostage. Anyway, so his son Antiochus IV is given over as a hostage for 12 years. He was over there. And then Antiochus III, he goes home. He's been defeated. He can't progress anymore to the west. So he has to go back home, and he's not happy about it. But it doesn't matter. He dies pretty much kind of shortly after this. But his son, so Antiochus III dies in 187. That's his number there. But his son, Antiochus IV, that one anyway, I guess it was his second born maybe, is not there. So his firstborn, of course, I guess, Seleucids IV, he's going to reign for a little while anyway. And so Seleucids IV Philopater takes his father's place briefly. He eventually was murdered pretty shortly into his reign by one of his chief ministers, apparently, who then didn't install himself, the one who killed him, but he installed Seleucus IV's younger son, but kind of as a puppet, but he was kind of behind, you know what I mean? So the man who killed the king was controlling the little son who was next in line. Okay, so that was it. But then he didn't count, but I guess he just didn't count on Antiochus IV coming back. But he did. And so as soon as Antiochus IV was released from captivity in Rome to the Romans, he came back home and put himself on the throne. Okay. So now we have, verse 20. Before we skip to, we got to mention this. verse 20 is all about Seleucus the Fourth. Here, that's who Daniel's talking about. There shall arise in his place, so in the place of Antiochus III, one who imposes taxes on the glorious kingdom. But within a few days he shall be destroyed, but not in anger or in battle. So Seleucus IV, he apparently imposed some taxes on God's people in the glorious on the glorious kingdom. But within a few days, in other words, his reign wasn't for very long, and he was murdered, poisoned, or whatever. And he was destroyed, but it wasn't in a battle or whatever. Okay, so that's Seleucus IV. But now going forward, Antiochus IV Epiphanes comes back, takes the throne of his father, and so verses 21 and following talk about him primarily. We're going to take verses 21 through 28 because Antiochus IV Epiphanes is a significant person in the history of God's people. Beginning in verse 21, and in his place, in other words, in the place of Seleucus IV, shall arise a vile person. So that's the first thing we learn about Antiochus IV. A vile person to whom they will not give the honor of royalty, but he shall come in peaceably and seize the kingdom by intrigue. In other words, it was like he wasn't the rightful heir, and so he came in and took it, which is what he did. Okay. Let's see. Verse 22, with the force of a flood, they shall be swept away from before him and be broken, and also the prince of the covenant. We'll talk about that. And after the league is made with him, he shall act deceitfully, for he shall come up and become strong with a small number of people. He shall enter peaceably even into the richest places of the province, and he shall do what his fathers have not done, nor his forefathers. He shall disperse among them the plunder, spoil, and riches, and he shall devise his plans against strongholds, but only for a time. Okay, so if you didn't quite catch it, he's not a good guy, right? He's a vile person. He is pretty unpredictable, it seems. Verse 21, let's see, it was verse 23. He comes in with a small number of people, so he doesn't have a huge army like of followers of his own. I mean, he was away for 12 years. And so he comes back kind of like a lone ranger here. And he, has a small following, and he also does something that none of the other rulers before him ever did, and that is when he goes in and attacks and takes booty, right? What is it called? Bounty, booty, either one. He shares it with those, in order to keep his followers, right? He shares it, which doesn't sound like a bad thing to do, but none of his forefathers operated that way, apparently. Okay, but he did that. Let's see, where am I? I don't know how much to go into all that. Okay, we're going to do it. Okay, because I think it's important for understanding.
Okay.
For understanding how people were living during this time. I think this is really important. Okay, verse 22 says this. With the force of a flood. What does your version say? That's different than mine. Verse 22.
I have New King James.
Oh, not yours.
Armies shall be utterly swept away before him and broken.
Wait, what was the first part?
Armies
Oh.
shall be utterly swept away before him.
Yeah. Armies shall be utterly swept away before him and be broken.
Broken.
Okay. And also the prince of the covenant.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what you're saying?
Even the prince of the
Even
covenant.
the prince of the covenant. Okay. So in my current studies, from what I can tell, perhaps, I think, this is the prince of the covenant is talking about a high priest, a specific one, named Onias III, Onias III. He was high priest during this time. He was a, strictly speaking, Orthodox Jew, like he was a Jew to the letter. But during this time, of course, you remember we talked about how Alexander the Great's mission was to spread Hellenism across the entire globe. Okay, and all the lands that he conquered. And so Palestine was no different. And so because of Alexander, you had Jews who learned and grew up. You had generations now of Jews who were more familiar with Hellenistic culture than their own. That's how drastic the times had changed. Okay, and so in Palestine, you can imagine then the conflict between those who are trying to hold on to their Jewish heritage and the law of Moses, and then the Jews who are like, I never learned that. All I know kind of is Hellenism, but I know I'm a Jew, and so I know I'm supposed to, but they're not as, adherent to the law of Moses. And so that's kind of what we're dealing with here in Palestine during this time is this. You have Jews, but some are very much in the Hellenistic camp, but then you have Jews who are very much not, and so those would be the Orthodox ones. And so that's what you have here, I think, happening with this Prince of the Covenant, this high priest named Onias III, who was strictly Orthodox in his Judaism. And then the Jews who favored Hellenism were very much opposed to Onias III, rightly so. I mean, they don't, agree with what he was doing. And favored Onias III's brother Jason. His name was just Jason. Okay, so Onias III was high priest, and he had a brother named Jason. Onias was the strict Jew, Jason, not so much. And so there was a big divide. Okay, now, because Antiochus IV saw the office of the priesthood as just a political office, and because he was ruling, he could put whoever he wanted on there. And so Jason saw the opportunity and paid Antiochus IV a large sum of money in order to become high priest. And it worked. Okay. Which, that would upset some Jews, right? But not the Hellenist ones, but, the Orthodox ones. That would upset some Jews. Okay. So Jason replaced Onias III as high priest by paying a large sum of money to Antiochus IV. And it caused, pretty good dissension between, among the Jews. And because of this transition of power in the priesthood going from an Orthodox Jew to a Hellenist Jew, then there was a lot of liberality. I'm really struggling for words today. I didn't know.
That sounds good.
Okay.
Works for me.
Yeah, the Hellenistic Jews took advantage of this, Jason being high priest. And so pretty soon now you had children not bearing Hebrew names, but Greek names. Jewish children bearing
Greek name.
Greek names instead of Hebrew names. Gymnasiums were being built, Greek gymnasiums. These are the ones where they practice sport in the nude.
Oh.
Okay, right. And so, the Greeks, that's how they did. That's how they did. All their Olympics were in the nude. You didn't know that? Oh,
No.
yeah, everybody.
No.
Why?
No.
Well, it's all, I guess, because there's
So
nothing
they
to
didn't get their
hinder,
clothes bloody or what?
nothing hindered them from running. I don't know. It was a Greek way. I don't know if I know the answer to that. But anyway,
Makes sense because they don't dress very much on the movies either.
yeah, that's
At least they
true.
took
Yeah.
care of it. The movies,
Yeah.
at least.
Some of
And
them do.
so the reason I bring all that up is because now that Jason is high priest and things are more lax, then you had now the Jewish people participating. Their young children were now practicing in the nude sport. So you can see how this is all declining really
Yeah.
here as far as among God's people. The world has crept in, right? Okay. And so Hebrew Orthodoxy now is beginning to seem out of date. Unpopular, out of date kind of thing. That's the vibe we need to understand from this period of history. Okay. As opposed to all the details. We don't necessarily need to know all those, but just that the office of high priest changed to somebody who was more liberal. And then so
Sounds
did
familiar.
the land.
I was gonna say, much
Sounds
like
familiar.
that.
Yeah.
It sounds very familiar.
And then to make matters worse, not only did Jason purchase the position and was, a Hellenist by all means. There came a fella. His name was Menelaus. I guess that's how you say it. Menelaus.
Mm.
Menelaus. That's how I'm going to say it.
Close enough.
He was a close friend of Jason. And you think that would be a good thing, but you know how things work in politics. So he, even though was a close friend of Jason, rose up against Jason and paid Antiochus IV even more money
Mm.
for the priesthood, for the office of high priest.
Hmm.
And so, of course, then Antiochus IV kicked Jason out, put Menelaus on as high priest, and this outraged the Jews, all of them, even more, because he wasn't even a Levite. And only Levites served as priests,
Mhm.
right, in the temple. But Menelaus was a Benjamite. And so this outraged everybody. I mean, especially the Orthodox Jews, this. So it just caused further division, is what we're saying here. It caused further division. Jason eventually did raise up an army to attack Menelaus in Jerusalem, but he was unsuccessful and all of that. But what it did was it put Antiochus IV on high alert as to just how deep the division among the Jews was in the area. Anyway, so he has to step it up now. So, in other words, this prompts Antiochus IV to step up his game in order to get better control of the dissension and division among the Jews, between the Orthodox Jews and the Greek Jews, the ones that are holding on to Hellenism. Okay. Let's see. Yeah. So that's the whole point of what we're saying here. Let's see, what did I say? Yeah. Verse 22, with the force of a flood, they shall be swept away from before him and be broken. And also the prince of the covenant is going to be taken too. In other words, the high priesthood is going to be sabotaged by a Hellenistic Jew, Jason, and then eventually by somebody who's not even a Levite, just somebody who paid Antiochus IV more money. Okay. And so Antiochus IV uses this division to his advantage, and he steps up his game eventually. And as Jesus said, a house divided just can't stand, right? And we definitely got a house divided here among God's people. That's the big picture here. Okay, now moving on. Let's go to verses 25 and 26. This is talking about Antiochus IV. He shall stir up his power and his courage against the king of the south with a great army. And who's the south? Remember? Who's
Egypt.
Egypt. And at this time, it would be Ptolemy the sixth ruling, if I remember right. Let's see. Yeah. Ptolemy the sixth would be, so he, at the beginning of this verse, would be Antiochus IV, shall stir up his power and his courage against the king of the south. That would be Ptolemy the sixth at this time. What do I have written there? Oh, yeah. Anyway, let's see. And the king of the south, Egypt, shall be stirred up to battle with a very great and mighty army, but he shall not stand, for they shall devise plans against him. So, in other words, the Seleucids are going to have victory over Egypt here. Egypt's going to lose. Let me see my notes here. Yeah. Same. Yep. Yes, those who eat of the portion of his delicacies shall destroy him. His army shall be swept away, and many shall fall down slain. So Egypt's going to fall here. Antiochus IV is going to go in and have success over Egypt, at least eventually. Okay. Now, moving on. Verse 27, both these kings' hearts shall be bent on evil, and they shall speak lies at the same table, but it shall not prosper, for the end will be at the appointed time. Next, 28, while returning to his land with great riches, this is Antiochus IV. He's going to return to his land with great riches, that is Jerusalem, Palestine, and his heart will be moved against the holy covenant. So his heart's going to be moved against he's getting prideful here. He just defeated Egypt, so now he's going to go back to Palestine, and he's got these Jews who are divided, fighting among themselves, basically. It's all out of control in his mind, so he's going to go back in and be a little more fierce about it. Strict. Okay. So he shall do damage and return to his own land. So that's really all that this is talking about. I do want to point out this phrase in verse 27 at the end where it says it will be at the appointed time. We're going to see that pop up again. In other words, this is all in God's timing here. This is all, individuals who are in power, kings and kingdoms, think that they came into all of that. But this is God. He's the sovereign one. He's in full control. He sets up kings, he takes them down. Okay, this is just reminding us that God's in control here. Okay, but we know now that Antiochus IV has some victory over Egypt, and we'll see it in verse 29. Look here again where it says, at the appointed time, he shall return and go toward the south again. So in God's timing, Antiochus IV is going to return to the south. He wants more of Egypt. I think historically, if I remember correctly, I may even have it in my notes somewhere, but when he went to Egypt the first time, he was able to conquer either the king at Memphis or the king at Alexandria. I can't remember which one it was, but only one of them. One Ptolemy there. Let me see. I think I have it here. Nope, I don't have it. So he goes back to try to get the other. That's the only thing we need to know. So it was incomplete. He was still successful that first go around into Egypt, but it was incomplete. And so now he's going to go back. That's all that Daniel's saying here. He's going to go back in God's timing. He's going to go back. This is verse 29. He shall return and go toward the south, but it will not be like the former or the latter. So it's not going to be the same as it was before. He's not going to be successful there because of verse 30. This is why he's not going to be successful there. My version says, because ships from Cyprus. What does your all say? Kittim. Okay. Yeah. This is just a reference to Western lands. It's a biblical way of referring to Rome for the most part. There's a power on the horizon over in the West who is going to continue to we've already seen them a little bit, but they're going to continue to, wreak havoc for Antiochus IV. So ships from Cyprus, or Roman forces, in other words, are going to come against Antiochus IV. Therefore, he will be grieved and return in rage against the Holy Covenant and do damage. So now he's infuriated, and he's really going to take it all out on the Jews in Palestine, the Holy Covenant. So he shall return and show regard for those who forsake the Holy Covenant. So the only people that he's going to show regard for, that he's going to like and accept, are those who forsake the Holy Covenant. Yeah. Okay. Let me see what else I have here before we move on. Okay. So let's tackle these verses. Let's read verse 31. And forces shall be mustered by him, and they shall defile the sanctuary fortress. Then they shall take away the daily sacrifices and place there the abomination of desolation. Y'all never heard that phrase before, have you?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. There's a lot of religious confusion about that phrase, abomination of desolation. But anyway. Okay, so he's going to come in. So he's going to try to go back to Egypt and gain some more territory there, victories there. But he is halted, actually. So historically speaking, what happened was when Antiochus IV went to Egypt the second time, Roman forces there forced him to retreat. Now, Rome, like I said, was coming up on the horizon, and they were busy with their own things, and they didn't have time just yet to go down in. They weren't positioned that well to go down into Egypt and take it as their own. But even though they couldn't do that, they knew that they didn't want Antiochus IV to have it either. So they knew that all they had to do then was go stop him. They didn't even have to go in and get Egypt yet. They just had to go stop Antiochus IV. And that's what they do. So that Antiochus IV doesn't get Egypt. Okay. Rome did not want it falling into the Seleucids' hands. All of it anyway. And so when the Roman troops force Antiochus IV to retreat, he is enraged by the defeat and the humiliation. And so he takes it out on the Holy Covenant against God's people. He only is going to show regard for those who forsake the Holy Covenant. He primarily appointed his general named Apollonius to go in immediately and occupy Jerusalem and slaughter their opponents. And they chose to do it on a Sabbath when they knew that the Jews wouldn't fight. And so you can imagine the slaughter was great. Because the Jews wouldn't defend themselves on the Sabbath. It was against the law of Moses. Okay, remember that. Okay. And so then he began to order immediate Hellenization of Palestine. And he made a very systematic attempt to do that. He was very specific. He was going to Hellenize everyone in Palestine, all the Jews, by force. And so this was in the year 167. No, not 167. I'm taking that back. Don't write that down.
Okay.
I don't have that date right. No, I do have that date right. Yes, write that down. That's 160. I had to think through it and make sure I had it.
67.
Yes, sorry. Yeah, your teachers
That's all right.
all over the map today. Yes, 167. Okay. 167 BC. Okay, 167 years before Jesus came. Here are some of the things that Antiochus IV did in order to Hellenize the Jews in his outrage. First of all, he ordered all copies of the Torah be destroyed. Okay. He set up altars for idol worship. Greek deities were to be worshipped by all. Okay. The Jews were commanded to set up altars and offer unclean animals.
Pigs.
And to eat pigs.
Mm-hmm.
And the king sent delegates all over the land to make sure this was enforced. Mm-hmm. He even brought in I thought I had it written here, an Athenian elder, philosopher, sent to Jerusalem. Yeah, I have it here. To supervise and enforce the new order, he identified the God of Israel with Jupiter, or the Roman god equivalent of Zeus. Okay. Wait, did I see the Roman god? No, the Jupiter was the Roman god equivalent of the Greek god Zeus. That's what I meant to say. So Zeus was Greek, Jupiter was Roman. And so he ascribed the name Jupiter or Zeus to Yahweh, the one true God. Okay, that's what he did when he came to town. Okay, so let's see. Circumcision was banned. Observance of any and all Jewish feasts were banned. Sexual immorality was practiced in the temple courts in worship to these foreign gods. That's not anything new. People have been doing that for ages and ages and ages. And so they're doing it here. It was bad. And of course, the penalty of death was the result if you didn't comply. Okay. It was bad. Eventually, Antiochus IV tore down Jerusalem's walls, their protection, and then built his own fortified citadel fortress there. He called it Acra. I've seen it AKRA or ACRA. But he built that around there in Jerusalem. It was located near the Temple Mount, and it served as a place that he could monitor the Jews like a watchtower. You know, he could make sure they were all doing what they were supposed to be doing, according to him, and not, you know, breaking the new law now. But it was his way to control the city, monitor the temple, suppress any kind of Jewish resistance to his plans here. So then, officially, apparently, according to history, on December 25th, 167 BC, the temple became the place to worship Zeus, where pigs were offered on the altar of Zeus, which is what I believe Daniel is describing here when he says the abomination of desolation. It's abominable, causes desolation. It was built on top of the altar of burnt offering there in the temple area. So it was just a slap in the face, really, to God and to the Jews, Orthodox Jews anyway. But that apparently was the historical date, December 25th, 167 BC. That's going to become important here later. Okay, so he's not a good guy. He does all this out of anger and humiliation, and he's trying to retain control of something. And so he's trying to use Palestine as a buffer between him and Rome, and this is his way of doing it. So that's through verse 31. He's going to do all of these horrible, horrible things. Take away the daily sacrifice and place there instead the abomination of desolation, which would be the temple of Zeus, or Zeus's altar there, where God is supposed to be. Okay, or where sacrifices are supposed to be offered to God. Okay, now beginning in verse 32. Those who do wickedly against the covenant he will corrupt with flattery, but the people who know their God will be strong and carry out exploits. Somebody read their version, not mine, not New King James. Verse 32.
He shall seduce with flattery those who violate the covenant,
Okay.
but the people who know their God shall stand firm and take action.
Very good. So now we have here in verse 32 two groups among those who are being persecuted who are going to side. One group's going to side with him and comply. They're going to be very happy eating pigs, sacrificing unclean animals to Zeus and all of these foreign deities. But then there's going to be the people, my version says, but the people who know their God shall be strong and carry out great exploits. So I believe here that we have an introduction to two groups of people. The first one is historically known as the Hasidim, Hasidism.
Try it again.
Hadism, Hasidim, or pious ones. That's what that means. These are the ones who refuse to veer from Judaism. And then you have here, I think, a second group of people mentioned who, let's see, but the people who know their God shall be strong, and then and carry out great exploits. So either the Hasidim were non-combatant, they were just the ones who weren't going to veer, but they're not going to fight, or they were combatant. In other words, they were not going to comply and they were going to fight against this. Or, I think both of these can fit in there. And we're introduced also to a group of people called the Maccabees here. Have you ever heard of them?
Yeah.
Maccabees.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. These Maccabees were completely combatant. They were fighters, guerrilla warfare fighters initially. But anyway, they were a militant group. And so I do want to shift our discussion, at least for the time we have remaining, to talk about the Maccabees. Because I think that's who we're being introduced here in verse 32 historically, to both the Hasidim and the Maccabees. Hasidim, just the ones who are not going to veer from Judaism. They may or may not have been, militant, like willing to fight. I don't know. But the Maccabees were, and they become very, very, very important in this period of history. And so I want to introduce them just a little bit and how they started and who started them and whatever. So, 167, this is when Antiochus does all this, the temple, everything, it's all just, everything's in horrible shape for the Jews. In 166, a man named Matthias, he was an older man, he had a big family, had a lot of sons. He was living in a town called Modine, and the king's delegate came to town and ordered Mattathias to sacrifice to a foreign god. But Mattathias refused. And while he was refusing, a Jew came up in order to do it for him. Uh-oh.
No, it's good.
Okay.
We have another printout, and it is going
Oh,
right
okay.
along with you. So
I'm telling the truth then?
no,
Apparently.
I'm not,
That's
we're not
good. I'm glad
taking
you're
you out.
checking me.
No,
No.
I was surprised that we could find something that actually goes along.
Goes along with you.
Okay, did
Because
you find
we're
that?
checking you.
On Google. I just
Oh,
Googled
you
it.
just Googled it? Yeah.
It's
Good.
just a
No, that's
period
good.
between,
There's only so much we can talk about in here that, you know what I mean?
I didn't know she had her paper because she was writing. I'm thinking,
Yeah.
it's all right here.
Oh, very good.
But I am
Very
putting the verses.
Yeah. Okay. So Mattathias was this elderly priest in Modine. He had a big family, and he refused. And then a Jew came up to try to do it for him, and Mattathias was angered by that and outraged by that, and so he killed that Jew, and he killed the king's delegate who was sent, and said, "Anybody who wants to join me now, because we are not going to stand for this." And so he begins this revolt against Antiochus IV. And tears down the altar, calls for everyone to join him in an effort to keep the covenant of Yahweh. Okay, so he's the one who starts this, what's known in history as the Maccabean revolt. Him and his 5 sons, John, Simon, Judas, Eleazar, and Jonathan. They're, them and many other followers joined the fight. And so this Maccabean revolt lasts for a few years. I have my date here, 167 to 160. But anyway, it eventually became known as the Maccabean revolt because it was named after Mattathias' son Judas Maccabee, because he became known as Judas the Hammer, because he had a lot of success. And so that's why then it became known as the Maccabean revolt, because it was they named him Judas the Maccabee, or Judas the Hammer, or Judah the Hammer, Judah the Maccabee. And so this became known as the Maccabean revolt. Okay. Now, so that was 166. Mattathias died shortly after all of that. He was older. So then they began to grow their little army during this time, and they had a pretty good sized army. They were pretty successful. They were able to tear down altars. They began circumcising their children. They, recruited Jews wherever they went. And so they had some success against Antiochus IV. But before we talk any further about Judas Maccabee taking up his father's reigns there, I do want to point out that let's just finish reading here in Daniel 11. Let's see, verses 33 through 35. And those of the people who understand shall instruct many, yet for many days they shall fall by sword and flame, by captivity and plundering. So in other words, there's going to be a bunch of people who are going to understand the way of God, and they're going to try to fight this, but there's a lot of people who are going to die too. Okay. Now, when they fall, they shall be aided with a little help, but many shall join them by, mine says intrigue.
Mine's flattery.
Flattery, okay.
Mm.
And some of those of understanding shall fall, to refine them, purify them, make them white, until the time of the end, because it is still for the appointed time. So here's the phrase again, reminding us this is all happening in God's timing. And this is where we are going to stop our verse by verse in Daniel chapter 11. And this is why. Because from here on out, beginning in verse 36 through Daniel 12, verse 3, from here on out, there is not a really good, solid consensus on who's being discussed here in these verses. When I read it, so if I continue reading from verse 36 to say 39, I think all of that could still really be talking about Antiochus IV. But some think, for some reason, I don't know why, that this shifts into talking about now Roman kings. I don't personally see that there. You guys will have to make your own judgment on that. But I think with the bottom line is from verse 36 to 12:3, there's not really, I can't really fall on a hard line about it because I don't know. And I think a lot of people don't know the exact. I think a lot of people try to fit in exact here like we've been able to do. But I think where either way you go, there's difficulties. There's questions like, well, that doesn't make sense if you do that. Like, why all of a sudden would Daniel be shifting to Rome here when it doesn't seem like a good shift of power, shift in dialogue or, narrative here? Anyway, so there are problems. That's why we're stopping right here. We're not going to go verse by verse anymore in this, other than to say that the rest of this is all going to happen in God's own appointed time. All of it is God's going to happen. But you can go read through that and study it. Google it if you want and see what they say. But I guarantee you there's going to be 1,000 different things written about it. But anyway, so you just have to, that's one of those sections of scripture that you don't know, you can't know maybe all of the exact details 100%, but that sticks back in there in your mind, and it stays there so that when it comes up, somebody's talking about it or preaching about it or here, then you go, oh, well, let me see. And you go back and you check and think, okay, well, that's not going to work in there.
Yeah.
Or yeah, maybe that is that or whatever. So there's a lot of things. But anyway, so that's where we're going to stop, and that's why. Because we can't really delineate with details what all this is talking about.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see where I am in my notes here. I don't need to talk anything more about that. Oh, the last thing I was going to say is that I do want, in case you didn't know or didn't remember, that over in Daniel 8, it is believed that Antiochus IV is being talked about in that chapter too, primarily verses 23 through 26. So if you want to jot that down in Daniel 8, 23 through 26, if you wanted to go back in there and read through that most everybody thinks that that's talking about specifically Antiochus IV because of all the things that he does wrong to God's people. Okay, so there's something. If you wanted homework, you can go back and read that.
Okay.
Okay, but back to the Maccabees as we wrap this up. Mattathias died. Judas takes up and leads where his father was leading, and his father dies, so he takes up the reins here. And so he was able to take that band of freedom fighters from guerrilla warfare, hanging out in the hills, to a strategic battle group who had strategic planning and victories, and he really did become a force to be reckoned with in Palestine, which is unique and good for God's people there. And so when Antiochus IV realized this, he sent more men in there to take out these Maccabees, Judas and his followers, to defeat that revolt. But it didn't work. He had no success in that. And Judas was actually able to regain the entire country to him. Okay, save for the ones who were still on the fringe of not going to comply to Judaism. Okay, but for the most part, this is a big deal. And so he restores the temple. He marches on Jerusalem. He's able to clean it out, restore the temple, put faithful priests in there, and destroy the altar of Zeus and all of that. That's a big deal. And so historically, everybody says that exactly 3 years from its desecration, when Antiochus IV set up the altar of Zeus on December 25th, 167, exactly 3 years later, on December 25th, 164, that's when Judas rededicates the temple, and the daily sacrifices are resumed, which is a big deal. Such a big deal that it becomes now a national Jewish holiday known as the Feast of Dedication, or it's also known as the Feast of Lights, or later it became known as Hanukkah.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, this, from what I read, the reason why it became known as the Feast of Lights is because there is a legend, tradition, a story that goes something like this, that when this happened, the Maccabees were only found enough pure oil to light the temple lampstand for one day, but it miraculously stayed lit for 8.
Wow.
Okay, so that's the story behind it. So it became known as the Feast of Lights. So it's a celebration. It's kind of like our 4th of July. It's a celebration of religious freedom, the triumph of light over darkness, right? The Jews got their freedom back. They no longer had to worship idols, eat pig, you know what I mean? Those kinds of things. It was a great, big, momentous occasion. It really was huge. So, just, I guess, ironically, it all happened on the same date, exactly 3 years later, according to the historical records. Okay. And I do want to point out John 10:22, the Feast of Dedication is mentioned there. Jesus, John 10:22. Yeah, Jesus is in Jerusalem. The text says that it was winter. And Jesus was walking in the temple in Solomon's porch. The Jews surrounded it. The Jews surrounded him and said, "Just tell us plainly if you're the Christ." And of course, he does. And by saying, "I and my Father are one," and they knew what that meant. And so then they took up stones to stone him. Of course, he escaped out of there. But anyway, that's the context of where this holiday. That's where that is. So it's not a Jewish holiday that was established during the time of Moses. Under the law of Moses, it came later.
Interesting.
Yeah, kind of like the one in Esther. Remember that? Purim
Yeah.
came later after the law of
Yeah.
Moses. So here's another one that came later. Okay, and apparently, I guess Jesus observed it, or at least it was recognized as a Jewish national holiday. Okay, even in the days of Jesus. Okay, the last thing I want to say is about the history of this Maccabean revolt. The history of this revolt is not going to be found in the Bible, of course, because none of this is. But there are what are called apocryphal books of the Apocrypha. Have you heard of that? Okay. These are generally, well, these are all books that are not in the canon of the Old Testament. They're not in the Bible because they're not considered written by inspired writers, and so they're extra. And there's the books of the Maccabees. There's like 8 that are historical books, not considered inspired, so they're considered part of the Apocrypha. But books, from what I understand, books 1 through 3 of the books of the Maccabees are the books that most of our knowledge of all of this that we've talked about today, that's where it comes from. Somebody wrote it down. Thankfully, that's how we know about it. Somebody wrote it down. So it comes primarily from the books of the Maccabees.
Spell Maccabee for me.
Maccabees.
Like bees.
Yeah,
B-E-S.
Bees.
Okay.
1 B, 2 C's.
I wasn't even close.
Yeah, the Maccabees. Okay. That's it. That's all. Okay, that gets us at least to how we're going to finish this out hopefully next week as far as the Greek Empire, because we're still going to be talking about them. We're just going to talk about how the Greek Empire wrapped up and how Rome came in and took over, how they all fell apart. Now, we know the Ptolemies are going to fall apart. And please note that on this handout, this is not a full extension of every Seleucid and Ptolemy.
Yeah.
This is just the primary ones from Daniel 11. I can point out a couple of things. I do actually want to point out 2 things from this chart. If you'll see here, Antiochus IV, right?
Mhm.
Ruling from 175 to 175 to 164. His son Antiochus V ruled after him but not for very long. You see that? 164 to 162. Yeah, not very long. Because I can't remember, and we'll talk about this next week. But there's a detour here where a cousin comes in and starts to reign. So there's a lot. It just gets a little complicated now. And then there's a man in black over here because he's important, but we'll talk about him next week. So we just want to point that out, that this is not the end of their reign here. So like Ptolemy the seventh wasn't the last one. Ptolemy. Okay. And there's lots of Cleopatra. I mean, there's a lot more history here during the Inter-testamental period. We got to about 164, or yeah, and then, there's still 164 years left in the intertestamental period before Jesus comes. So there's still a lot more history here. But hopefully next week we'll get to the end of the Greeks and then to the beginning of the Romans. But I also want to point out, I don't know if you will find this interesting or not, but I thought it was kind of funny. If you'll notice, to a lot of these rulers, they have other names. So like at the very top, Seleucus the first Nicator.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mhm.
And then over here you have Ptolemy the first Soter, right? So you see these extra names, Philadelphus. Some of these I can't even say. Okay. Is anybody interested in wanting to know what those names mean?
Sure.
Okay. So Nicator means victorious man or man of victory. So Seleucus I called himself Seleucus I, man of victory. Yep. Ptolemy I Soter, he called himself that because Soter means savior. They thought very highly of themselves. Okay.
They thought they were gods.
They thought very highly of themselves. So then Ptolemy the second, Philadelphus. I bet y'all know what that means.
Brotherly love.
Brotherly love. Yeah, that's right. That's right. And then his son was Ptolemy the third. You can take a stab at that. Euergetes. That means a good worker or someone who does good deeds. We'll just go on down the line. Ptolemy the fourth, Philopater. That just means love for father. Love is Philopater's father, just like in Philadelphia, Delpha's brother, Philo, love. Okay. Going down to Ptolemy the fifth, Epiphanes. That means illustrious one. There's a Ptolemy the sixth, Philomater. Let's take a guess at that. If Philopater means love of father or love for father, what does Philomater?
Love of mother.
Love for mother. That's exactly right. Look right across there, Antiochus the fifth, Eupator. Do you see Pator in there? Eupator. That means. Oh, let's see. I'll wait till you get there. Right across from Ptolemy, where we were. Antiochus the fifth. Got him.
Yes.
Antiochus the fifth, Eupator.
Eupator.
Yeah. We know Pator means father.
Father.
Noble.
Noble.
Of noble father, apparently.
Mm-hmm.
Of noble father. And his father was Antiochus IV Epiphanes. But he was called of noble father. Okay. Antiochus IV wasn't noble in the true sense of the word. Epiphanes, of course, we already know that means illustrious one. I think we got all. Go on up to the Seleucids there. Seleucus II, Callinicus. Do you see that there? Seleucus II.
Oh, yeah.
See him?
Uh-huh.
It's by Daniel 11:9.
Yeah.
Okay. Callinicus means beautiful victor. That was his name. And then one more. Right above him was his father, Antiochus II. Theos. That means divine.
I didn't get the one at 145 to 116 BC down at the
Ptolemy the 8th.
8th.
Yeah, he would be the same as Ptolemy the 3rd. You get you.
Oh, okay, I see it.
Yeah.
Okay.
He'd be the same.
Yeah.
Name, meaning, in other words, not the same person, but the same name.
Right. Got it.
Oh, and this is funny. I found this hilarious. So when apparently the Jews, of course, Antiochus IV Epiphanes was his name, right? Antiochus IV Illustrious, the illustrious one. was his name, but the Jews had a word for him, a play on his name.
Mhm.
Instead of Antiochus IV Epiphanes, they called him Antiochus IV Epiphanes, and that name means madman. So that's what they called him, Antiochus Epiphanes instead of Antiochus Epiphanes. So I thought that was funny.
That was good.
What about Alexander, the Man in Black?
Yes.
Balas?
Yeah, I don't know what his. Yeah, I didn't look up his
Oh, okay.
name meaning, but we'll talk about him, Lord willing, next week.
Okay.
Okay,
I love
that was a
figuring-
rough one, ladies. I had a hard time getting into that one. Last week it was like I was in a groove, everything was real smooth, and then
Yeah.
all of a sudden we had to stop because it was already an hour, and I don't know, I just lost my groove. Maybe I'll get it back next week.
Oh,
You gonna be in Oklahoma?
Yeah, I'll be in Oklahoma.
Okie dokie. Well, that's too bad we didn't talk about that. Maybe I'll introduce. Had a whole nother page of notes I wanted to talk about, but I'll introduce that next.
well,
I'll use
sweet.
that as an introduction maybe next week.
There you go.
'Cause I think it's important.
That'll work.
I don't know who's leading us in prayer today.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know.
Dana says he goes by Keith, but is yours, Michael K.
I don't know.
And it doesn't help I kept hearing my voice down the hallway. You hearing it? Oh, it's so annoying.
Echo, echo, echo.
Yes. I don't like that.
I think it's my turn, isn't it?
I don't know, Connie. I don't even know
Yes.
where the
Yeah.
paper is. I wrote
Because you
it.
weren't here and somebody else took your place.
I
That's-
did.
Yeah.
Last week.
Yeah.
Not last week. I was here last week. It
Yeah,
was Haley last week, I think. It was, or somebody.
Well, it's two people that weren't here,
Yeah.
and then I came up.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's in there somewhere. Okay, Connie, you're up. Wait, right? Is that what I heard? Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
Our Father in heaven, thank you so much for this wonderful day and all your wonderful blessings. Thank you for Veronica and all the history we're learning about the period between the old and the new. And be with all of us as we go our separate ways today. And be with this country as they're going through some trials right now.
Mhm.
We know that you're in control and that whatever happens, it's your will. Thank you so much for everything. In Jesus' name, amen.
Yeah. Thank you. Clint's loud
I know.
down there.
I have a question.
Okay.
As Christians, are we required, or not required, to celebrate Hanukkah like the Jewish people do? Does God recognize that?
Are
Are you a Jew?
No.
Okay, that answers that.
At least I haven't looked at my lineage lately to see if I am or not.
No.
You're definitely not.
It-
You're a Gentile.
Yeah, the Jews recognize it like we do the 4th of July. Are you obligated to honor 4th of July? No. Is it fun? Sure. You know, that kind of thing.
I don't know. I thought about doing like
More-
buying. I always almost bought a Hanukkah stamp. Was going to do it,
Um,
and I was doing it because Jesus was Jewish, and I thought, well, I wonder if as Christians that would be right. If God would, if he'd be wrong in doing that. I don't know.
But Jews are not the chosen people anymore.
That's true.
They
That is
they
true.
lost that.
yeah.
The
They
way
flunked.
lost it.
Now Christians are the chosen.
You know, and that's one of the remarkable things when you think about God. We've talked a lot about God being sovereign over nations, right?
Mhm.
Kings and
Mhm.
kingdoms, and most of the kingdoms we talk about are evil, heathen nations. You know, Gentile heathen nations. You know, he's using wicked people to, you know, judge his own people
Mhm.
using wicked nations, and so he takes, you know, sets up kings, takes down kings, or whatever. But there is really no partiality with God, because he is even working here historically to take down his own nation that he set up
Mhm.
in Abraham.
Mhm.
Mhm.
He's
Yeah.
he knows what they're going to do when Jesus comes,
Mhm.
and so he's going to take care of that
Mhm.
once and for all. And that's pretty remarkable in a couple of ways, because we don't often think of that. Well, God is the one, you know, it's not like, I mean, God in a very distant sense set up the Babylonians and the Persians and the
Right.
Greeks, or whatever. But in a very, very real and specific and special sense, he called Abraham, right, out of his country to become his own special people, right, a nation for his own. And so he loved that nation, and he used it, but it was all, according to this plan. And then he knew what they were going to do, and they were going to be, outright reject the Christ. And so then he was going to take them down too.
Yeah.
And we don't often think about that. But then the other counterpart to that is it makes the promises that we read about, like especially like in Daniel 2, about a kingdom that will never be destroyed.
Mhm.
There's
Jesus is-
there's one
Jesus.
that will never, ever, ever be taken down.
God's
God's
That's
kingdom.
right.
Mhm.
And I think that just,
Because of Jesus.
that just
That's
that
right.
encompasses everybody.
Mhm.
yeah, and you don't have to be of a certain nationality.
Right.
No, it's
Right.
for
to be
everybody in
part
the
of
world.
that kingdom that will never, ever be taken down. That
Right.
king's never going to be dethroned.
Uh-huh.
That kingdom's never going to be destroyed.
And they don't get that.
Yeah,
Right.
and that's a really. But anyway, I just think it highlights when we remember that God was even going to, destroy the nation He set up.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
He was even going to destroy them.
Yeah.
In order, I think, to highlight this one kingdom that's never going to be destroyed. Anyway, I was thinking about that the other day. but,
Mhm.
Yeah. That's
This all
Beautiful.
Beautiful.
But,
I
Yeah,
tried
and-
telling my friend about what Clint talks about is that now Christians are the chosen people and the Jews aren't. And she will sit there and argue, oh no, God does not break covenants. He made a covenant with them and she's sticking to that. And no, he
They
doesn't break. I said, yeah, they
They
did.
broke.
They broke it. And you try to talk to her. She's so adamant. And so she flat will come out and tell me, your pastor's wrong. I said,
And that's exactly what Clint talked about last night is the
Yes.
covenant of blessings, the covenant of mercy. Because God knew, He wanted to give him a good shot.
He did. He was very
If you
patient.
do this, then this.
Right.
If you
He was
don't,
really,
then
really
this.
patient.
And so
That's
yeah,
right.
they were definitely.
I think he's being patient now too.
Oh, I know.
I think he
Real
is,
patient.
too.
He is.
He's probably
Well, he waited 100 years for Noah to build the ark, and
And you think all of
That's-
it is still working out.
Yeah.
According to
Mhm.
God's timing. Like Trump is the president right now.
Mhm.
Because
people. Aren't you
God
worried?
sent
I
him up
don't
there, I
know.
think.
Yeah.
And Iran's over there with their Ayatollah because God sent him up.
And
He
they
knows.
got rid of some of that
Yeah.
already.
Just today.
Yeah.
they,
Yeah.
took care of a lot
This
of that.
nation isn't going to last either, which is
Right. That's
scary.
scary.
You don't ever think
It
about
is.
living in a nation or being part of a nation that's going to be destroyed.
Yeah.
Because it had been blessed.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've been super, super blessed.
Uh-huh.
Where do we go from here?
Yeah, can't imagine. I'm sure it won't last in my or happen in my lifetime, but
Yeah.
I didn't mind.
Well, Jesus can come. That'd be all right.
anytime, yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
like
yeah,
for
my
the
friend's
time.
always talking about, we're in the end times. We are living in the end times. The war in Iran, we're in the end times. They're doing the red heifer over there and
Yeah.
we're in the
We're in the end times.
We've been in the end
Yeah.
times.
Yeah, man.